Before we start talking about how we translate our existing knowledge of performing HTTP requests in vanilla JavaScript into React, we need to revisit a core idea of React. That is, components should behave or should be pure functions, meaning that they take input and they return UI output without any side effects. Think of those React functions as mathematical functions, meaning no matter how many times you call the same function, if we say fx equal x multiplied by 2, no matter how many times you're going to call this mathematical function, you're always going to get the same response. So that's kind of like what we want our React components to be like. Regardless of how many times we try to call this component, it would always return the same output. So if we look at this example right here, where we have function greetings, it will take name as a prop or as an input, and it will return this output. Regardless of how many times I call it with greetings Yahya, it would always give me that response. And you see that I'm calling it right over here. Now, data fetching is technically considered a side effect because we don't know what the output is going to look like. We don't even know if we're going to get an output at all. Now, let's take a look at our bookmarks component here. As you can see, there's more to it than what we had with the greetings function, but you can see that there are two types of functions or two types of code that we have in this component. There is the render code, anything that returns a UI that is to be rendered. And there is other functions that we have up here, which is to manage the state or to manage any event handler that we have in our component. Same thing if I switch over to my new bookmark form here, you see that we have what is the render code and then the code that will be used as an event handler or as an event response. I'll switch back to the bookmarks component. And now here's the thing, I have not saved this file yet because I know this is going to cause a lot of issues, and I'm going to show you that in the console right over here. As soon as I hit save, this component is going to render and it's going to call this fetch function. This function is going to go to my server URL, which I have running on a separate window. This is outside of the scope of this class. But what it will do is that it will get the result or will get the bookmarks for the specified category. It will convert it to JSON and it will update the state of this component or the bookmark state of this component with whatever that data is, and if there are any errors, then it will throw that error. Now, the problem here is when we call set bookmarks or when we call set error, we're going to have to re-render the component again because it's a new state of the component, which triggers React to say, okay, now I have a new state for it and I need to reload it again. But when that happens, we call fetch again, which calls set bookmarks again, which calls fetch again, so on and so forth. We get into this infinite loop, which obviously crashes your application altogether. Now, I'll show you that for a second, but then I'm going to have to kill that application or comment this code out. If I hit save, you see the first thing, while we're sending the request with a null because no category has been specified yet, but then it keeps calling again because the component keeps rendering again. The core issue here is that rendering should not cause any side effects. We need our components to be pure so that regardless of how many times we call it or regardless of how many times it refreshes, the same code runs again and the effect compounds. So now we need a place or a designated place where we can have those side effects without causing our application to re-render. And that is what React offers us by another hook called the use effect. So I'll add that over here. And I'll basically wrap my function here with that use effect function. I'll select all of this and move it inside. Our use effects takes two parameters or one or more parameters. The first one being the function that needs to be executed as a side effect. In that case, I'll move over all my fetch logic inside there. And the other is basically what we call the dependency list. What is it that we want to be the trigger that when that changes, we call that effect or we update that side effect? And in our case, that is going to be the value of category. We're effectively saying that whenever the category value here changes, we want you to call this use effect and to re-render or to refetch this data again. So now if I save this, now we still have the same error, which looks like it's trying to call bookmarks with a null value of category. But as you can see, it has called it once and it didn't attempt to call it again. So let's try to resolve that real quick. So instead of just fetching it, I'm going to check if there is no category, If there is no value for category, then I just want you to exit and do nothing in this side effect. If I save this and refresh, as you can see, because the value of category at this point is null, nothing has been called or no request has been sent out to the API. Effects run after the render, not during it, which keeps the render phase pure and our render logic without any side effects. Let me expand this a little bit. Here we go. That's good enough. Now, if I select any of those categories and I click on it, we get those values rendered, or those bookmarks from the movies category populated. Same thing for books, music, videos, and if I hit the empty, we get the no bookmarks yet. So let's break this down again. Let's see what happens when we actually call this component. First, we are passing in a category or no category, which is we're going to handle over here. But basically what we're doing is we're setting a default state for our bookmarks to an empty array, and we're setting the error to null. We're going to skip the effect altogether, and then we're going to go into this section right here. If there is no category selected, then we show the user the select a category output. If I refresh the page again, you can see it right here. If there was an error, then we will show an error that, or a paragraph that basically says there was an error loading the bookmarks. And then otherwise, we're going to go into this section where we show the category as an H3. We loop over our bookmarks and we iterate over them, showing the name for each of those bookmarks. Once all of that is done, that's when we go back to the effect section and we ask React to, okay, now that we have this UI, we want you to go fetch this data for us. Once it gets the data, it will update the state, and when the state updates, that's when we update the values one more time. So this aligns with the React mental model of let's render our UI first, and once we have it, let's synchronize it with the outside world. At this point, we have a simple rule. Rendering should stay a pure calculation from just the props and the state, and effects are the tools through which anything that is external or any side effects should be taking place. Now, this is the foundation for data fetching in React, but it's really only the foundation. There's a lot of deeper implications that we're going to learn more about in these coming videos. For example, once the application gets more than one state that we're trying to toggle between, or even if I just stick with this one state that I have and I toggle between the values quickly, you'll start seeing some of those implications. Now, I am on the music. Okay, that didn't work. Let's keep switching. All right, so as you can see, even though it says movies and that's the state that I'm on, it actually is showing me the values from the music bookmarks. Now, this is one of the bugs that we're going to be talking about, which is caused by the race conditions of how the fetch requests are being sent out. But there are other bugs that are related to not being able to see the loading state of the application. Is it loading or is it not? We might have issues of stale data or other issues that you might overlook when you're simply using just the use effect. So the idea that I'm trying to get across here is that fetching data isn't all that difficult. It's pretty much the same that we've done with vanilla JavaScript. It's really managing the asynchronous state around this fetch request that makes this a little bit more complicated. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of those complications in the next video before I introduce you to the library that I recommend you would be using, which is React Query. Otherwise, if I don't talk about the issues, this is just going to seem like a normal improvement, but it really is a magical solution to many problems that you run into when you work with fetch requests in React world.